"I was just thinking," he replied, not looking at her. "How strange it is that we can fix a broken valve, but not a broken dream." She paused. "What dream?" He finally turned to her. His eyes, steel gray, sharp, tired, held hers. "The one we never talked about. The one we both pretended didn't matter." Clara's smile faltered. "Elias?" He didn't let her finish. He pulled a thin envelope from his inner pocket, cream-colored, sealed with a wax stamp he didn't recognize. "They just gave me this. The final results. From the clinic." Her breath hitched. "The fertility tests, you said you weren't ready to see them. I am now." He handed it to her. She took it slowly, fingers trembling. She broke the seal. "Read the first line, then the second." Then she looked up at him, her face drained of color. Her lips parted like she was about to scream, but no sound came out. "Diagnosis absolute, irreversible azoospermia. No viable spermatozoa detected. Fertility prognosis nil." The words blurred. She read them again and again. "No," she whispered. This can't be right. We did the test 3 times. The last one showed, this is the final report." He cut in, voice low, controlled, the voice of a surgeon delivering bad news to a family. "It's signed by the head of the lab. It's official." Clara's hand tightened around the paper. "Elias, this is a mistake. You know how many errors happen in labs. We've talked about this. We've planned for this. We'll do another test. We'll go to Zurich. I don't want another test," he said, his voice cracking. Not with grief, but with shame. "I want to know the truth. And this is it. I'm sterile. I can't give you a child, Clara. I can't give us a future." The music swelled. A waltz, elegant, romantic. A couple danced nearby, the man's hand resting gently on his wife's waist. Elias watched them. He saw the way the woman leaned into him, the way he kissed her temple. He saw what he had lost before he even realized it was gone. Clara stepped back. "So that's it, that's your answer, one piece of paper and you give up?" "I didn't give up," he said, his voice rising now, raw. "I faced it. You've been holding on to hope like a lifeline. But I'm not a man who lives in fantasy. I'm a doctor. I deal in facts. And the fact is, I can't father a child. And you deserve more than a man who can't give you what you want." "What I want," her voice broke. "I want you, Elias. I want us. I don't need a child to complete me. I never did. I thought you knew that." He shook his head. "You don't get it. It's not about you. It's about me. I'm supposed to be strong. I'm supposed to be the one who fixes things. And now, I'm broken. And I can't pretend I'm not." She reached for his hand. He pulled away. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." She didn't cry. Not then. She just looked at him. The man she'd loved since they were 22. The man who held her through panic attacks and miscarriages and nights of insomnia, and saw a stranger wearing his face. "I'll be in the car," she said quietly. "When you're ready." He didn't follow her. He stood there, alone. As the gala continued around him, laughter, clinking glasses, someone raising a toast to the man who gave life to 1,000 hearts. He felt like a fraud. An hour later, he walked out into the cold Swiss night, the envelope still in his pocket. He didn't go home. He went to his office. He sat at his desk, staring at the photo of Clara on his monitor. The one where she was laughing on their honeymoon in Santorini, sunlight catching her freckles, her hair wild in the wind. He opened his laptop, typed, "I can't do this anymore." He didn't say goodbye. He just left. 3 days later, Clara found a note on the kitchen counter. "You deserve more than a man who can't give you what you want. I won't be the reason you grow old alone. I'm sorry I wasn't enough." She read it once, then again. Then she crumpled it into her fist and pressed it to her chest, as if she could hold the words inside her until they stopped hurting. She didn't tell anyone he was gone. She didn't cry in front of her friends. She didn't tell them she was pregnant. Not yet, because even in the wreckage of her heart, she still loved him. And she still believed somewhere that he would come back. He didn't. Not then. Not for 3 years. But somewhere, in a quiet hospital room, under fluorescent lights, two tiny hearts, his hearts were beating. And one day they would need him, and he would finally have to face the truth. Not the one on the paper, the one inside him, the one he'd buried under pride, the one that whispered, even in silence, you didn't lose them because you were broken, you lost them because you were afraid. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada topico que for desenvolve. Mi conti sobre o topico tu com dialogo como seu fosso espectador, sempre lembrando de desenvolver com vida moco, com os sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters Quin 3, next, 80B, A3B. The silence in the Vargas home had become a living thing. It didn't scream, it didn't slam doors, it didn't cry, simply existed, like dust settling on untouched furniture, like the space between heartbeats when you're waiting for news you already know will destroy you. Clara moved through the house like a ghost, wearing her own skin. She woke before dawn, made coffee for two. His cup still placed on the left side of the counter, steam rising into nothing. She'd stare at it until the warmth faded, until the porcelain grew cold. She never washed it. Not yet. Maybe never. She didn't sleep in their bed anymore. She slept in the guest room, where the walls still smelled faintly of his cologne, the one he wore the night he left. She kept it. She kept everything. His socks, his favorite pen, the book he never finished reading, The Alchemist. He'd scribbled in the margins, when you want something, all the universe conspires to help you achieve it. She read that line every night, and every night, she whispered back then, why didn't it help us? 3 weeks passed, then 6, then 9, and still Elias didn't call. She told herself he was grieving, that he needed space, that he'd come back when he was ready. But then, one rainy Tuesday morning, she woke up nauseous. She didn't believe it at first. She took 3 tests, all positive. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, the plastic sticks scattered like fallen soldiers around her, and pressed her palm against her stomach. There's a life here, and he's not here to know it. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just whispered into the steam-filled air, you left me, but you didn't leave me empty. She called her sister that night. I'm pregnant, she said, voice steady. Silence on the other end. Then, Clara, he doesn't know. No. Do you want him to? Clara looked out the window. Rain streaked the glass like tears too heavy to fall. I don't know if I want him to, she said. But I need him to know that I didn't give up on us. Not even when he did. She didn't tell anyone else. Not her mother. Not her friends. Not even her therapist. She carried it like a secret prayer. And then, slowly, the world began to change around her. She stopped wearing loose sweaters. She started reading baby books, not to plan, not to dream, but to remember what it felt like to hope. She painted the nursery herself. Soft blues and warm creams. She hung a mobile of wooden stars above the crib, each one carved by her own hands, each one labeled with a word: love, courage, patience, belonging. She bought tiny socks, onesies with little airplanes, a stuffed bear with one button eye missing, the kind Elias used to say looked like it had been through a war and still smiled. She didn't name them yet, not until she was sure, not until she knew she could say their names without breaking. One evening, 6 weeks in, she sat on the floor of the nursery, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the empty crib. She spoke aloud, quiet, raw, trembling. I know you're not supposed to talk to babies who aren't born yet, she murmured. But I need you to know something. Your father, he thinks he's broken. And he left because he believed it. But you're not proof of his failure. You're proof of his love. Even when he couldn't see it. Even when he ran. She placed her hand flat against her belly. You're his heartbeat, she whispered. He just doesn't know it yet. A knock at the door startled her. It was the postman. A letter. Thick. Official. She opened it slowly. It was from the clinic, the one that had given Elias the diagnosis. "Dear Ms. Vargas," it read, "we are writing to apologize for an administrative error regarding your husband's fertility test results. Due to a mislabeling of samples during a system upgrade, your husband's results were inadvertently mixed with another patient's. The diagnosis of azoospermia was incorrect. His sperm count was, in fact, within normal range. We are deeply sorry for the distress this has caused." Clara read it once, then again. Then she dropped it. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat there, in the dim light of the nursery, staring at the letter on the floor. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. And then, for the first time since he left, she laughed. A broken, wild, aching laugh that echoed through the empty house. "Oh, Elias," she whispered, tears finally spilling over. "You left me for a mistake." She held the letter to her chest. "And now, you're going to have to come back to find out you're a father." She didn't send it to him. Not yet. She tucked it into the drawer beside the baby books. She didn't want him to know about the child before she knew if he'd come for her, or if he'd just come for the truth. And if he came for the truth, would he come for them, would he come for her, or would he still be too afraid that night? She lay in bed, her hand resting on her swollen belly, and whispered into the dark, "If you're listening, I'm not asking you to fix us. I'm asking you to stay." And for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. She felt alive, with two hearts beating inside her, and one somewhere out there, still beating, but broken, waiting to be mended, not by science, not by a lab, but by love, the kind that doesn't run, the kind that waits, even when it hurts, even when it's too late, even when the man you love thinks he's not enough. She closed her eyes, and she dreamed of his hands, not the hands that signed the letter, the hands that would one day hold their child, and finally, feel what it meant to be a father. Not because he was perfect, but because he chose to stay, even when it broke him, even when it was too late, even when he didn't think he deserved it. She smiled in her sleep, and somewhere, miles away, in a cold apartment lit only by the glow of a computer screen, Elias Vargas stared at his reflection. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. He hadn't slept through the night in weeks. He was rich. He was famous. He had everything. And yet he kept hearing her voice, not in memory, but in the quiet. "You didn't leave because you were broken. You left because you were afraid." He closed his eyes, and for the first time since that gala, he didn't look away. He let himself feel it. The weight, the loss. He didn't go back. He told himself it was mercy. But the truth, he was terrified. Terrified that if he looked at her, really looked, he'd see the truth in her eyes, that she didn't need him, that she'd be better off without him, that she'd find someone whole, and worse, that she already had. So he ran. He sold the house, moved to Zurich, changed his phone number, deleted every photo of her from his devices. He buried himself in work. 16-hour days, surgeries that lasted until dawn, lectures in Tokyo, Berlin, Singapore. He became a ghost in a tailored suit. A man who saved lives but refused to live his own. 3 months passed, then 6, then a year. He didn't know she was pregnant. He didn't know she'd kept the truth from everyone. He didn't know she'd named the first one Luca, after the word for light in her grandmother's tongue. He didn't know she'd whispered it to her belly every night. "You are my light, my stubborn, beautiful light." And then, one evening, 2 years after he left, Elias received an invitation. Not to another gala, to the opening of the Clara Vargas Foundation for Pediatric Emotional Health. It was held in Geneva, the same city, the same theater. He almost didn't go. He stared at the envelope for 3 days. The return address was printed in elegant script: Clara Vargas, MD, PhD. He didn't recognize the logo on the invitation. A single star, 2 arms stretching upward, like tiny arms reaching for the sky. He thought it was just a coincidence. He thought it was a trick. He thought, maybe, just maybe, she'd moved on. So he went, not to see her, not to apologize, but to prove to himself he was over it. He arrived late, dressed in black, no tie. He slipped into the back of the room, unnoticed, as the lights dimmed. The stage was simple, a single chair, a screen behind it. Then she walked out. She wore a simple ivory dress, no jewelry. Her hair was shorter now, curled at the ends. She looked softer, calmer, stronger. He didn't breathe. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked down, at her hands, and then she lifted her head, and the screen behind her lit up, not with statistics, not with graphs, but with photographs, dozens of them, children, smiling, crying, holding hands, hugging nurses, hugging her, and then one photo, a close-up, a boy, 3 years old, dark curls, a crooked smile, one dimple on the right cheek. Elias's breath stopped. His knees nearly buckled, because he knew that smile. He knew those eyes. He'd seen them in the mirror every morning since he was 16. He'd seen them in the way he laughed when he thought no one was watching. He'd seen them in the way he reached for things, always with his right hand first. The boy in the photo was him, and then a second photo, a girl, tiny fingers curled around her brother's. Her eyes, wide, dark, intelligent, glinted with mischief. And her laugh, Elias had heard that laugh, in his dreams, in the silence, in the quiet moments when he thought no one was listening. He'd heard it. She had laughed like that. Clara. He turned to the screen again. The caption beneath the photos read, "To Luca and Mira, my greatest miracles. Born in silence, raised in hope, never forgotten." Elias's vision blurred. His chest cracked open. He didn't cry. He couldn't, because the real horror wasn't seeing them. It was realizing they were his, and she hadn't told him, because she knew. She knew he'd leave. Again. He stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. No one noticed. No one cared. He ran, out of the theater, into the cold night. He didn't stop until he reached the river. He stood on the bridge, gripping the railing, his breath ragged, his body shaking. He pulled out his phone. Trembling fingers typed, "Who are they?" He didn't send it. He stared at the message. Then he typed again, "Are they mine?" Still, he didn't send it. Because what if she said yes? What if she said, "Yes, they're yours. And I waited. And I loved them. And you weren't there. Not once." What if she said, "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd run again." He dropped the phone, clattered onto the stone bridge. He sank to his knees. And then a voice, soft, familiar. "Elias." He didn't turn. He couldn't, because he knew. He'd recognize her voice anywhere, even after 3 years of silence, even after 3 years of pretending he didn't miss her, even after 3 years of trying to forget the way she smelled, like lavender and rain. She stood beside him, no coat, just the ivory dress, her hands folded in front of her. "I didn't invite you to see the foundation," she said quietly. "I invited you to see them." He swallowed. His throat was raw. "They're mine." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He finally turned. Her eyes were red, not from crying, from holding back. "I told myself I'd wait until they were old enough to understand," she said. "Until they could ask why their father never came. Until they could look at me and say, 'Why didn't he love us?'" She took a step closer. "I didn't want them to hate you." He looked away. "I don't deserve your mercy." She reached out. Her fingers brushed his cheek. He flinched. She didn't pull away. "I didn't tell you because I wanted you to choose them." Me, Elias's breath caught. He didn't move. He didn't dare. Because if he did, if he reached for them, he'd have to admit something he'd buried for 3 years. That he loved them. Not because they were his blood, but because they were his. And that meant he'd have to face the truth. That he wasn't broken. He was afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of being loved. Afraid of being enough. Clara stood. She walked to the window, looked out, then spoke not to him, to the light. "I didn't tell you about them, because I didn't want you to feel guilty." She turned. Her eyes were clear, not angry, not broken, just tired. Because I knew you'd come if you thought you owed them. She stepped closer, looked him in the eye. But I wanted you to come. Because you wanted to. Elias closed his eyes. He felt the weight of every second he'd lost. Every night he'd spent alone. Every time he'd stared at his reflection and seen a ghost. He opened his eyes, looked at Luca, and Mira, Clara, and whispered, I didn't know how to be a father. Clara didn't say anything. She just reached out and took his hand and placed it gently on Luca's. The boy didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He just leaned into it and whispered, It's okay to be scared, Papai. Elias's breath shattered. Tear fell. Then another. He didn't wipe them. He didn't hide them. He just held his son's hand. And for the first time in 3 years, he didn't run. He didn't hide. He just stayed. And then Mira reached up and touched his cheek. Your heart is beating fast, she said. He nodded. Yeah. Is it because you're scared? He swallowed. Yes. She smiled. A small, perfect, heartbreaking smile. Mine is too. She squeezed his finger. Then let's beat together. And for the first time, Elias didn't fight it. He let the tears fall. He let the fear stay. And he let himself be there. Not as a surgeon. Not as a man who fixed things. But as a father who was finally ready to learn how. The monitor beeped. Slow, steady, 2 hearts, 1 rhythm, and somewhere, a third heart was beginning to beat again. Not because it had to, but because it finally chose to. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know if he'd be enough. He didn't know if Clara would ever forgive him. But for the first time, he didn't need to know. He just needed to be here, and hold their hands, and breathe with them, and let the silence not be empty, but full of love, waiting to be spoken, waiting to be lived. And as the morning light stretched across the hospital floor, he whispered, I'm here. And this time he meant it. Not for them, not for guilt, not for redemption, but for himself. Because he finally understood. Love doesn't wait for perfection. Because in that moment, holding Luca's trembling hand, feeling Myra's tiny fingers curled around his thumb, Elias Vargas didn't feel like a surgeon. He didn't feel like a man who had walked away. He felt like a man who had finally come home. The room was still. The machines beeped in rhythm. Luca's erratic, Myra's steady. His own heart, unsteady, too, trying to find its way back. Clara didn't speak. She just sat, watching, like she was afraid if she moved. If she breathed too loud, the moment might shatter. And maybe it would. Because this wasn't a reunion. This was a resurrection. And resurrections are never gentle. He looked down at Luca again. The boy's eyes were heavy with sleep, but his gaze never left Elias's face. Do you remember me? Luca whispered. Elias swallowed. I didn't know you existed. Luca didn't look away. But you know me now. Yes. Then tell me, why did you leave? The question hung in the air like a blade. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't intervene. She just watched. Because she knew this wasn't for her to answer. This was for him. Elias closed his eyes. He didn't want to answer. He didn't think he could. But the silence was worse. So he opened his eyes and spoke. I thought I was broken. Luca blinked. But you fixed my heart. Elias's throat tightened. I didn't fix it. I just know how to cut it open. Then why didn't you fix yours? The question wasn't childish. It was surgical, precise, a scalpel to the soul. Elias looked at Clara. She didn't look away. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded. Go on. He turned back to Luca. I was afraid, he whispered. Afraid that if I stayed, to fail you, that I'd be like my father. That I'd love you, but not well enough. Luca frowned. What does not well enough mean? Elias's voice broke. It means I'd look at you every day and still feel like I didn't deserve to be your dad. Mira stirred. She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were dry, but her voice was soft as a lullaby. You're here now. Elias looked at her. She reached up and placed her palm against his cheek. just like she had before. Mommy says love isn't about being perfect. She paused. Her breath was slow, deliberate. It's about showing up. Elias closed his eyes. He felt her warmth. He felt the weight of her trust. And for the first time since he left, he didn't want to run. He wanted to kneel. He wanted to beg. But he didn't, because he knew begging wouldn't fix this. Presence would. He opened his eyes, looked at Luca. "Will you let me try?" Luca didn't answer right away. He looked at Mira. She nodded. Then he looked back at Elias and whispered, "Okay." Just that one word, and it undid him. Elias's shoulders shook. He didn't cry out. He didn't sob. He just let the tears fall, quiet, heavy, silent, onto Luca's blanket. Clara stood. She walked to the window, looked out at the hospital garden. The trees were bare, but something was blooming, a single crocus, pushing through the frost. She turned. "Your surgery is in 6 hours." He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Luca. "I know. You're nervous." He nodded. "I've operated on this condition before." "Then why are you scared?" He looked up. For the first time, he met her gaze, and he didn't look away. "Because this time, I'm not just the surgeon." He swallowed. "I'm the father." The room went still. The machines beeped. A nurse walked past in the hallway. No one spoke. Then Luca shifted. He reached out, not for Elias's hand, for his face. He cupped Elias's cheek with both small hands and whispered, "You're not going to fail us." Elias's breath hitched. "Why do you think that?" Luca smiled. A crooked, tired, perfect smile. "Because you're crying." He paused, then added, "Dads who fail don't cry." Elias's chest cracked open. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just leaned into Luca's touch and let the boy hold him, as if he were the one who needed saving. Mira leaned forward. She reached for the forestand and pulled a small stuffed bear from beneath the blanket. It was worn. One ear was missing. One button eye was loose. It smelled like lavender, like Clara, like home. She pressed it into Elias's hands. "This is Bear," she said. He looked down. The bear was stitched with care. A tiny heart was embroidered on its chest, in faded thread. Papai, he didn't ask. He didn't need to. He knew. She'd made it. For him. Before she even knew he'd come back. He looked up. Tears blurred his vision. Why did you make him?" Mira looked at him, very seriously. "Because when I was little, I used to talk to him." She paused. "And I told him that one day you'd come." Elias's breath caught. "You told him I come back?" Mira nodded. "And what did he say?" Mira smiled. "He said, I'm waiting." Elias looked down at the bear, at the stitched name, at the missing ear, at the one button eye. He pressed it to his chest and whispered, "I'm here." He didn't say it for them. He said it for Bear, for the boy who'd stitched hope into fabric, for the girl who'd loved him without knowing him, for the woman who'd carried his children alone, and for himself, the man who'd spent 3 years running from the one thing he'd always been too afraid to face. Love. Not the kind that shouts, the kind that waits, the kind that stitches hearts into bears, the kind that whispers, "I'm waiting," in the dark. And now he was here, not because he had to be, not because he owed them, but because he finally understood he didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be present. The clock ticked. 6 hours. The ore would be ready. The team would be waiting. The world would expect a miracle. But Elias knew the real miracle wasn't in the surgery. It was in the quiet, in the hand that held his, in the bear that bore his name, in the girl who believed in him before she knew him, in the boy who saw his tears and called them proof. Clara stepped forward. She didn't take his hand. She didn't kiss his cheek. She just sat beside him and whispered, "They're not asking you to fix them." She paused. Her voice was soft, but it cut deeper than any scalpel. "They're asking you to stay." He looked at her, really looked. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't see the woman he lost. He saw the woman who'd loved him through his silence, through his fear, through his absence. And still she stayed. Still she believed. Still she waited. He didn't speak. He just leaned his forehead against hers. And for the first time, he didn't pull away. He let himself be held. By her. By them. By the fragile, fierce, beautiful love they'd built in the dark. The machines beeped. The clock ticked. The bear held his heart. And somewhere, in the quiet, the hospital hummed around them distant footsteps, intercoms crackling, nurses murmuring in hushed tones. But inside room 312, time had stopped. Elias didn't move. He sat in the chair beside Luca's bed, the stuffed bear, papai stitched in faded thread, pressed against his chest like a talisman. Mira had fallen asleep again, her head resting on Luca's shoulder, her breath slow and even. Luca was awake, watching him, not with suspicion, not with anger, with something worse, hope. And hope was the most dangerous thing of all, because hope meant you believed. And if you believed, you could be broken again. Elias cleared his throat. I need to go prepare. Luca didn't answer. He just looked at the bear, then back at Elias. You're scared. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. Elias nodded. Yes, me too. Elias blinked. You are. Luca swallowed. I don't want to wake up and not see you. The words hit like a scalpel to the ribs. Elias's hands tightened around the bear. I won't leave, he whispered. Luca stared at him. Then slowly he reached out, not for his hand, for his face. He traced the dark circles under Elias's eyes. You've been crying a lot, he said. Elias's throat closed. I have. Why? Because I'm sorry. Luca frowned. Sorry for what? For leaving. For not knowing you were here. For thinking I wasn't enough. Luca didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He just whispered, Are you enough now? Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at the boy, at the curve of his nose so like his own, at the way his brow furrowed when he thought, just like Elias used to do, at the faint scar on his left ear, from when he'd fallen off the swing last summer. Clara had told him about it, in a letter she never sent. He didn't cry. He just stood up, brushed himself off and said, I'll try again tomorrow. I didn't tell you. I didn't want you to think I was waiting for you to fix him. Elias swallowed. He looked into Luca's eyes and said, I don't know. Luca didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just whispered, Then let's find out together. Elias's breath caught. He didn't know what to say, so he leaned forward and pressed his forehead to Luca's, just like he'd seen Clara do when she tucked them in, just like he'd seen in photographs he'd never allowed himself to look at. Luca didn't pull away. He leaned in and whispered, Okay. The silence stretched, warm, alive. Then Mira stirred. She didn't open her eyes, but her hand, small, warm, trembling, reached out and found Elias's. She didn't say anything. She just held on. And Elias, he held back, because if he held too tight, he might break. And if he held too loose, he might lose them. So he held just right, like a heartbeat, not too fast, not too slow, just there. The door creaked open. A nurse entered, smiling gently. Dr. Vargas, your team is ready. We'll need you in 10 minutes. Elias didn't move. He didn't look at her. He looked at Luca. Can I come back after? The nurse hesitated. Of course. You'll be right here when he wakes up. Luca's fingers tightened around Elias's. Promise? Elias's voice cracked. I promise. Mira opened her eyes. She looked at Elias. Not with fear, not with hope, with certainty. You're going to fix him, she said. Elias swallowed. I'll try. She shook her head. No, she reached up and placed her palm over his heart. You're not fixing him. She paused. Her voice was soft as a prayer. You're fixing you. The words didn't land. They unlocked something. Something deep. Something buried. Elias felt it. A crack. A rupture. A dam breaking. He looked at Clara. She stood by the window, watching. She hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken. But her eyes, they were full. Not of tears. Of memory. Of grief. Of love. She had carried this alone. For 3 years, she had held their hands at night. She had whispered lullabies when they cried. She had kissed their foreheads and said, "Your father is out there. He just doesn't know how to come home." She had never said he was a bad man. She had never said he didn't love them. She had only said, "He's afraid." And now he was here. And she didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stepped forward and took his hand, not to comfort him, not to forgive him, but to say, "I'm still here." And that was enough. The nurse cleared her throat gently. "Dr. Vargas, we're ready." Elias stood. He didn't let go of Luca's hand. He didn't let go of Myra's. He just lifted their hands, both of them, and pressed them to his chest, right over his heart. "I'm going in," he whispered. Luca nodded. "We'll be here," Mira whispered. "We're not letting you go." He kissed their foreheads, one after the other, soft, slow, sacred. Then he turned, walked to the door. He didn't look back, because if he did, he might not leave. He stepped into the hallway. The lights were brighter here, the air colder. The nurses moved quickly. The gurney waited. The hors d'oeuvres loomed. He stopped, one hand on the handle. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm scared." A voice behind him, quiet, familiar. "Clara, you always were." He didn't turn. "I don't know if I can do this." She stepped beside him, didn't touch him, didn't look at him, just stared straight ahead. "You don't have to be perfect." She paused. Then, "You just have to be present." He swallowed. "I'm trying." She turned to him then, for the first time since he came back. She looked at him, not as the man who left, not as the stranger, but as the father. She reached out and placed her hand over his, on the door. "Then go," she whispered. He looked at her, and for the first time he didn't see the woman he'd lost. He saw the woman who'd loved him through his silence, through his fear, through his absence. And still she stayed. Still she believed. Still she waited. He nodded and pushed the door open. The lights blinded him. The machines beeped. The team stood ready. One of them looked up. "Dr. Vargas, you're late." Elias didn't apologize. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just walked in. And as the mask went on, he whispered to himself, "I'm here, not for the surgery, not for redemption, not for her, but for them, for the 2 small hearts beating in that room, for the bear with the missing ear, for the drawing taped to the door, for the child who said, 'You're not fixing him, you're fixing you.'" And as the anesthetic dripped into Luca's vein, Elias raised his hand and pressed it against the glass, as if he could feel the boy's heartbeat through it, as if he could whisper, "I'm here." And this time he meant it, not as a doctor, not as a man, but as a father. And the surgery began. No one knew that the real operation wasn't on Luca's heart. It was on Elias's soul. And the scalpel, it wasn't steel. It was truth. And the incision, it was forgiveness. And the stitch, it was love. Slow, deliberate, unbreakable. And as the clock ticked, 1 minute, 2, 5, 10, Elias didn't blink. He didn't move. He just stood there, holding the glass, and praying not for a successful procedure, but for a second chance. Because this wasn't just about saving a life. It was about saving a father. And he was finally ready to be saved. By them, by the quiet, by the bear, by the child who said, "I'm not letting you go." And he wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. Not ever. The monitor beeped. Steady. Strong. And for the first time, Elias didn't hear the rhythm of a failing heart. He heard the rhythm of a beginning. And he whispered, "I'm here." Again, and again, and again, until the world heard it, until his soul heard it, until the boy on the table, and the girl holding his hand, and the woman watching from the door all heard it too, and believed, because sometimes love doesn't shout. Then beep, 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 steady. Elias's gloved hands hovered over the incision site. He'd done this 100 times, 1,000. He knew the anatomy like his own breath. The septal defect, the arrhythmia, the thin, frayed tissue that had been weakening since birth. He'd seen it in scans. He'd studied it in journals. He'd operated on it in strangers, but never on his own child. His fingers trembled, not from fear of the procedure, from fear of the meaning. This wasn't surgery. This was confession. He leaned in. The scalpel glinted. Dr. Vargas, the anesthesiologist, asked, "You ready?" Elias didn't answer. He looked at the monitor, at the rhythm, at the faint, irregular pulse. He remembered Luca's voice. "You're not fixing him. You're fixing you." He closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry." Not to the team, not to the machine, to the boy, to the child who'd waited, to the father he'd refused to be. Then he cut. The first incision. Clean, precise. The room fell silent. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. Blood welled thin, pink, alive. The team moved. Suction, clamps, retractors. But Elias, he didn't move like a surgeon. He moved like a man digging through rubble, looking for something lost. He peeled back tissue, exposing the heart. It beat, weak, fragile, beautiful. And then he saw it. The defect, smaller than he'd expected, like a crack in stained glass. A flaw, a mistake, a wound. He leaned closer, and for the first time he didn't see a pathology. He saw a story of survival, of a heart that had beaten for 3 years without a father, of a heart that had learned to love anyway. He felt his throat tighten. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He just whispered, "You held on." The scrub nurse glanced at him. Dr. Vargas, he didn't look up. "I said, you held on." Silence. Then a quiet sob, not from him, from the anesthesiologist. She turned away, wiped her eyes. No one said anything. No one needed to, because in that room they weren't just operating on a child. They were witnessing a miracle. Not the kind you measure in success rates, the kind you feel in your bones. Elias reached for the suture. His hands shook. He took a breath and whispered, "I'm here." Then he began to stitch. Slow, deliberate. Each knot a promise. Each thread a prayer. He didn't speak to the team. He didn't speak to the machine. He spoke to Luca. "I'm sorry I didn't know you. I'm sorry I thought I wasn't enough. I'm sorry I left. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving." The stitches were perfect. Not because he was the best, but because he was finally trying. The team watched, in silence. No one rushed. No one commented, because they knew this wasn't just repair. It was resurrection. And then the last stitch, the final knot. Elias held his breath. He looked up, at the monitor, at the rhythm. It was still irregular, but it was stronger, deeper, more certain, like a heartbeat learning to trust. The anesthesiologist whispered, "He's stabilizing." Elias didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." For the first time, he didn't thank God. He didn't thank the team. He thanked the boy for not giving up, for not forgetting, for waiting. He stepped back. The surgical team began closing. The lights dimmed slightly. The room filled with quiet. Then a voice, soft, from the observation window. Clara. She'd been standing there, all along, watching, not through glass, through time, through silence, through every second he'd missed. She didn't knock. She didn't enter. She just pressed her palm against the glass and whispered, "He's beautiful." Elias turned. He looked at her, through the glass, through 3 years of silence, through every tear she'd cried alone, through every night she'd held their hands and whispered, "He's coming." He didn't say anything. He just walked to the window and placed his hand over hers. On the other side, their palms touched, through glass, through time, through pain, through love. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just looked at him and said, "You stayed." He nodded. "I did." She looked back at the monitor, at Luca's steady, fragile rhythm, then back at him. "He didn't know you were his father." Elias swallowed. "I know. He didn't know you were scared. I know. She turned to him. Her eyes were clear, not forgiving, not bitter, just awake. He knew you were here. Elias looked down at his gloved hands, still stained with blood, still trembling, still holding. He whispered, I didn't know I was. She didn't answer. She just pressed her forehead against the glass and whispered, I'm proud of you. He didn't speak. He just closed his eyes and let the words sink in, not as a compliment, as a lifeline. He turned back to the oar. The team was finished. Luca was being wheeled out. Mira was awake. She sat up in bed, eyes wide, eyes searching. She didn't ask where her brother was. She didn't ask if he was okay. She just whispered, He's coming back. Isn't he? The nurse nodded. Yes, sweetheart. Mira looked at the door, then at her own chest. She placed her hand over her heart and whispered, I felt him. The nurse frowned. Felt him, Mira nodded. He's here. She looked at Elias, through the glass, through the hallway, through the silence, and she smiled. A small, quiet, knowing smile, because she didn't need words. She didn't need explanations. She just needed to feel him, and she did. She felt his heartbeat, through the walls, through the air, through the space between them, because love doesn't need proximity. It just needs presence. And Elias, he was present, not as a doctor, not as a man who fixed things, but as a father who had finally learned that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being there, even when you're afraid, even when you've failed, even when you think you're too late, even when you think you don't deserve it. He walked back to the recovery room. The doors opened. He stepped inside. Mira was alone. She looked up, and she didn't say, Where's Luca? She didn't say, Is he okay? She just held out her hand and whispered, Will you sit with me? He sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He just sat and waited. She leaned her head on his shoulder, just like Luca had, and whispered, I'm not scared anymore. He swallowed. Why not? She looked up. Her eyes were dark, full of stars. Because I felt you. She paused. Then, I felt you when you were stitching his heart. She smiled. Your heartbeat. It's different now. He looked at her. What do you mean? She placed her small hand over his chest, right over his heart, and whispered, It's not broken anymore. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, he didn't try to fix anything. He didn't try to be strong. He just let himself be held. By her, by the silence, by the truth. And he whispered, I'm here. And this time, he didn't need to say it again. Because she already knew. Because Luca already knew. Because Clara, who stood in the doorway, watching, silent, tearless, whole, already knew. And the world, the whole damn world, could hear it now. Because love doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It doesn't wait for permission. It just shows up and beats, one heartbeat at a time. And Elias was finally learning how to let his own heart beat. With them, not for them, not because he had to, but because he finally chose to. And as the sun dipped below the hospital windows, and the first stars blinked awake, 2 children slept. One heart healed, and one man, for the first time in 3 years, was no longer afraid of being loved, of being enough, of being a father, because he wasn't fixed. He was found, and he was home, not because the surgery was over, but because the real operation had only just begun, and he was ready to stay, to love, to be, not perfect, just present, just here. He didn't look for the nurse. He looked for him. Elias was asleep, in the chair beside the bed, head tilted back, gloves still on his hands. The surgical scrubs were wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. His chest rose and fell, slow, uneven, like a man who hadn't slept in years. And yet he was here, still. After everything, Luca didn't move. He just watched, for a long time, until his throat tightened, until his eyes burned, until he whispered, Papai. No answer. Elias didn't stir. Mira stirred first. She sat up slowly. Her eyes were clear. She didn't ask where her brother was. She didn't ask if he was okay. She just looked at Elias, and then at Luca, and smiled. "His heartbeat's steady," she said. Luca didn't answer. He reached out, slowly, carefully, and touched Elias's hand, just the tip of his finger, on the back of his glove. A whisper of contact. Elias flinched. Then his eyelids fluttered. He woke, not with a gasp, not with panic, but with the slow, heavy rise of a man returning from a long, dark journey. He blinked, looked down, at Luca's fingers, at his own gloved hand. He didn't pull away. He just whispered, "Hey!" Luca didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just said, "You stayed." Elias swallowed. "I did." Why? The question was simple, but it carried the weight of 3 years. Elias looked at the monitor, at Luca's rhythm, at the steady, beautiful beep. He looked at Mira, at the bear on the bedside table, at the drawing taped to the door, then back at Luca, and he said, "Because I realized I didn't lose you because I was broken." He paused. His voice cracked. "I lost you because I was afraid." Luca stared at him. Then he reached up and pulled off Elias's glove, slowly, one finger at a time, as if he were unwrapping a gift. When it was off, he placed his own small hand, warm, trembling, alive, directly over Elias's, skin to skin. No barrier, no distance, no science, just flesh, just feeling. Elias froze. His breath stopped. He didn't pull away. He couldn't, because the warmth, it wasn't just heat. It was memory. It was the same touch he'd felt once before he left, before he ran, before he believed he was too damaged to love. Luca's voice was quiet, but it cut through everything. "I'm not scared anymore." Elias's throat tightened. "Why not?" "Because you're here." Elias closed his eyes. He didn't speak. He just let the boy hold his hand. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a surgeon. He didn't feel like a man who had failed. He felt like a father who had been found. Mira leaned forward. She picked up the bear and placed it in Elias's lap. Then she reached into the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was crumpled, taped at the edges, drawn in crayon, a stick figure man, 2 stick figure children, a heart above the man's head, and beneath it, in shaky, uneven letters, "Papai, I missed you." Elias's breath caught. He didn't take. He didn't look at it. He just stared at it, as if it were sacred. Mira whispered, "I drew that the night before the surgery." Elias swallowed. "Why?" "Because I knew you'd come." He looked at her. "Why did you think that?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked at Luca, then back at Elias. "Because when mommy cries at night, she says your name." Elias's chest cracked. He looked at Luca. The boy didn't look away. He just whispered, "She says it like it's a prayer." Elias closed his eyes. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just leaned forward and pressed his forehead to Luca's, just like before, just like he'd seen Clara do, and whispered, "I'm so sorry." Luca didn't say it's okay. He didn't say you're forgiven. He just whispered, "Then say it again." Elias lifted his head. "What? Say you're sorry again." Elias blinked. "Why?" "Because I want to hear it." Silence. Then Elias looked at Mira. She nodded. "Say it." He swallowed and whispered, "I'm sorry I wasn't here." Luca nodded. "Say it again." "I'm sorry I didn't know you." Another nod. "Say it again." "I'm sorry I thought I wasn't enough." Mira whispered. "Say it one more time." Elias looked at them, at the boy who held his hand, at the girl who kept his name on a bear, at the mother who never gave up. And he whispered, "I'm sorry I left." And then he broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a single tear fell onto Luca's blanket. And then another, and another. He didn't wipe them. He didn't hide them. He just let them fall. And Luca, he didn't pull away. He didn't say it's okay. He just wrapped his small fingers tighter around Elias's and whispered, "That's the first time you've cried for us." Elias looked at him. "What do you mean?" Luca's voice was soft, but it was the clearest thing Elias had ever heard. "Before. You cried because you were scared." He paused. Then, "But now, you're crying because you love us." Elias's breath shattered. He didn't answer. He just pulled Luca into his arms. Not gently, not carefully, but with everything he had. With every second he'd lost. With every night he'd spent alone. With every lie he'd told himself. He held him tight, as if he could stitch his soul to the boys. As if he could become his heartbeat. As if he could make up for 3 years in one embrace. And Mira, she climbed onto the bed and pressed herself against his side and whispered, "Don't let go." Elias didn't. He held them, both of them, one arm around Luca, one arm around Mira, and he whispered, "I won't." He didn't say, "I promise." He didn't say, "I'll do better." He didn't say, "I'm sorry" again. He just held them and let the silence speak. Because sometimes the loudest thing in the world is the quiet of a father who finally stops running. The nurses came in. They saw. They didn't interrupt. They didn't smile. They just turned off the light and left the door open. Clara stood in the hallway. She'd been there all along, watching, holding her breath. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She just pressed her palm to the door and whispered, "Welcome home." And then she walked away, not because she didn't want to be there, but because she knew this wasn't her moment. It was theirs, and she had waited long enough. She didn't need to be in the room. She just needed to know he was staying, and he was. He didn't move for hours. He didn't sleep. He didn't speak. He just held them. And when Luca's breathing slowed and Myra's head drooped, he didn't let go. He just kissed the top of Luca's head and whispered, "I'm here." And then he kissed Myra's temple and whispered, "I'm here." And then he whispered to the dark, "I'm here." And this time he didn't mean it for them. He meant it for himself, because he had spent 3 years believing he was broken. But now he understood. He wasn't broken. He was becoming. And they were the mirror, and the medicine, and the miracle. And when the dawn came, soft and quiet, Luca stirred. He opened his eyes and looked at Elias and whispered, "Papai." Elias didn't hesitate. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He just smiled, for the first time in 3 years, and whispered back, "Yeah, baby." And then he held him, just like that. No surgery, no diagnosis, no guilt, just love and presence, and the quiet, steady beat of a father who finally chose to stay, and a child who never stopped believing he would. And somewhere in the hallway, Clara sat on the bench, and she closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm proud of you," not because he fixed a heart, but because he finally let his own be seen. And for the first time, they were all whole, not because they were perfect, but because they were together. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. And as the sun rose, painting the hospital walls gold, Elias didn't move. He didn't sleep. He didn't speak. He just held them and whispered, "I'm here," again and again and again, until the silence didn't feel empty, until it felt like home, until the word Papai wasn't just a name, it was a promise, and he was finally ready to keep it. Not tomorrow, not someday, now, right here, right now. Luca curled against his chest, one small hand clutching the sleeve of his scrubs like a lifeline. Mira pressed against his side, her breath warm and even, her head resting on his arm, just below his shoulder, where his heartbeat thudded steady now, no longer erratic, no longer afraid. The room was quiet. The machines hummed softly. The morning light slipped through the blinds, thin, golden, forgiving. And then a knock, gentle, too gentle. Elias didn't wake. He didn't stir. But Mira did. Her eyelids fluttered. She didn't open them. Not yet. She just listened. To the knock. To the silence after. To the quiet sigh. Then the door opened. just a crack. Clara stood there. She wore the same ivory dress. Her hair was loose now, a few strands curled against her cheek. Her eyes were red, not from crying, from holding back, from waiting. She didn't come in. She didn't speak. She just looked at them, at Elias, sleeping, vulnerable, human, at Luca, peaceful, safe, his Amira awake, watching, knowing. And for the first time since he left, she didn't see the man who abandoned her. She saw the man who had come back, not because he had to, not because he was told to, but because he chose to. She didn't move. She didn't whisper. She just let the silence speak. And then Mira lifted her head. Slowly, she looked at her mother and whispered, "He's not leaving." Clara didn't answer. She just stepped inside, quietly, closing the door behind her. She walked to the window, didn't look at Elias, didn't look at the children. She looked at the garden. The crocus was still there, blooming, against all odds. She turned, and finally spoke. "You didn't have to do this." Elias didn't wake, but Mira did. She sat up, looked at her mother, then at Elias, then back at her mother, and said, "He didn't do it for you." Clara blinked. What Mira didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just said, "He did it for himself." Clara's breath caught. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stared at her daughter, at the child who saw too much, who felt too deeply, who had learned to love without being loved back. And then Luca stirred. He didn't open his eyes. He just murmured, "Mama." Clara's heart cracked. She stepped forward, slow, trembling, and sat on the edge of the bed. Not too close, not too far, just there. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Luca's forehead. Her fingers lingered, just a second, long enough for him to sigh. And then she looked at Elias and whispered, "I didn't think you'd come back." Elias didn't wake, but his hand tightened just slightly around Luca, as if he heard, as if he knew. Clara swallowed. "I didn't tell you about them," she said, voice soft as snowfall, "because I didn't want you to feel guilty." She paused. Her voice broke, just a little. "But I also didn't tell you, because I was afraid you'd come back, and then leave again." Silence. The machines beeped. A bird sang outside. And then Elias stirred. His eyelids fluttered. He didn't open them, but his voice came out, rough, raw, barely there. "I didn't leave because I didn't love you." Clara froze. She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. He didn't open his eyes. He just kept holding Luca and whispered, "I left because I thought I didn't deserve to love you." The words hung in the air, not loud, not dramatic, just true, and that made them devastating. Clara's hand trembled. She looked at Mira. The girl nodded. "Keep going." Clara turned back to Elias and said, "You didn't deserve to love us." Elias opened his eyes, slow, heavy, like he'd been underwater, and just now surfaced. He looked at her, not with shame, not with anger, not with apology, with honesty. "I thought love was something you earned." He paused, looked at Luca, then at Mira, then back at her. "I thought if I wasn't perfect, if I wasn't strong, if I couldn't give you a child, then I wasn't worthy of being a husband, a father." Clara didn't speak. She just watched him, and for the first time she didn't see the man who ran. She saw the boy he'd been. The boy who'd been taught that love was a reward, that worth was measured in achievements, that failure meant you were unlovable. She reached out and took his hand, not to comfort him, not to forgive him, but to say, "I see you." And he didn't pull away. He let her hold it, just like Luca had, just like Mira had. And then Mira whispered, "Mommy, why did you wait?" Clara looked at her, then at Elias, then back at Mira, and said, "Because I knew love doesn't wait for perfect." She paused. Her voice cracked. "It waits for present." Elias closed his eyes. A tear slipped out. He didn't wipe it. He just whispered, "I didn't know how to be present." Clara leaned forward. Her forehead touched his. just for a second, just enough, and whispered, "You're learning." He opened his eyes, looked at her, and for the first time he didn't look away. He didn't hide. He didn't pretend. He just said, "I'm scared." She smiled. Not a happy smile, not a relieved one. A quiet, tired, beautiful smile. "I know. I'm scared I'll mess up. I know. I'm scared I'll fail them. I know. I'm scared you'll still hate me." She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him. And then she whispered, "I don't hate you." He swallowed. "Then what do you feel?" She looked at Luca, at Mira, at the bear on the bedside table, at the drawing taped to the door. And then she looked back at Elias and said, "I feel like I'm finally breathing again." He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just let her words settle, like rain on dry earth. And then Luca stirred. He opened his eyes and looked at Clara and whispered, "Mama, can you hold us too?" Clara didn't answer. She just shifted and curled around them, one arm around Luca, one arm around Mira, and her head rested on Elias's shoulder. Just like that. No words, no explanations, no apologies, just skin, just warmth, just presence. And for the first time in 3 years, they were all together, not as a family that had broken, but as a family that had chosen to be whole again. Elias didn't move. He didn't dare. He just closed his eyes and let himself be held by them, by her, by the quiet, by the truth. And when the nurse came in with breakfast, she stopped. She didn't speak. She just smiled and left the tray on the table and closed the door. Behind her, the silence returned, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full, full of breath, full of heartbeat, full of love. And then Mira whispered, "Do you think he'll stay?" Clara didn't answer. She just kissed the top of Luca's head and whispered, "He already did." Elias didn't speak, but his hand, still holding Luca's, squeezed. Just once, a silent yes. And then he whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." And this time he didn't say it for them. He said it for himself, because he finally understood. Love doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence. And he was finally here, not because he fixed their hearts, not because he saved their lives, but because he finally let them save his. And as the sun climbed higher, painting the walls gold, they stayed. Just like that. 3 hearts, 1 breath, 1 promise, and no more running, no more hiding, no more fear. Just here, now, together. And when the afternoon light turned to dusk, Elias opened his eyes and looked at Clara and whispered, "Will you let me be their father?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, and then she kissed his cheek, just once, soft, slow, and whispered, "You already are." And for the first time he believed it, not because they said so, not because he fixed something, but because they let him stay. And that was the only proof he needed, that he was enough, not because he was perfect, but because he was here, and he wasn't going anywhere, not ever again. The bear sat on the table. Its one button I glinted in the fading light. The stitched name, Papai, was the only thing that mattered. And Elias, he reached out and picked it up, held it to his chest, and whispered, "I'm here," again, and again, and again, until the silence didn't feel like loss, but like home. And he was finally home, with them, and for them, and because of them he was no longer afraid. He was whole, and he would never leave again, not for a diagnosis. Luca's fingers curled around his thumb, Myra's palm pressed against his cheek, and Clara, her voice, soft as a lullaby, whispering not words, but warmth. "You're here, you're here, you're here." He woke to the smell of soup, not hospital broth, not sterile, tasteless sludge, but real, garlic, thyme, a hint of lemon, his mother's recipe. He opened his eyes. The room was dim. The sun had set. The lights were low. Mira was asleep against his side. Luca was curled into his chest, one arm flung over his ribs like a shield. Clara sat in the chair beside the bed. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the window. The curtains were open. A single street lamp glowed outside. Its light caught the steam rising from the bowl on the nightstand. She hadn't moved. Not once. She'd been there since dusk, waiting, watching, holding the silence like a prayer. Elias didn't speak. He didn't move. He just watched her. The way her hair fell over her shoulder. The way her fingers traced the rim of the bowl. The way her breath came slow, steady, like she was afraid to break the quiet. He swallowed and whispered, "You made this." She didn't turn, just nodded. "Your mother's recipe." He closed his eyes. He hadn't thought of his mother in years. Not since the funeral. Not since he buried her with the same silence he buried his own heart. She used to make this soup when he was sick, when he was 7, when he broke his arm, when he failed his first exam. She'd sit beside him and say, "Love doesn't fix everything, Elias, but it stays." He hadn't remembered. Until now. He looked at the soup, at the bowl, at the spoon resting beside it. A single spoon. For one. Not 3. Not 4. Just one. He looked at Clara and whispered, "You made it for me." She turned. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was calm. "I made it for all of us." He shook his head. "There's only one spoon." She didn't answer. She just lifted the bowl and held it out to him. "Drink it." He didn't take it. He just stared. Why? She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just said, "Because you haven't eaten in 3 days." He looked at her, then at Luca, then at Mira, then back at the soup. "I don't deserve it." She didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She just leaned forward and placed the bowl on his lap. Then she took his hand and pressed it around the warm ceramic and whispered, "You don't have to deserve it." He looked at her, confused, terrified. Then why she looked at the children, then back at him. "Because I'm tired of watching you punish yourself." He blinked. What? She stood, walked to the window, looked out, then turned and said, "I've watched you cry in the dark. I've watched you stare at your reflection and hate what you see. I've watched you think love is something you earn, not something you're given." She stepped closer. Her voice dropped. "I've watched you sit in this room, holding them, and still believe you don't belong here." Elias's throat tightened. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just held the bowl. Warm, real, alive. Clara sat back down and whispered, "You didn't leave because you didn't love us." She paused. Her voice cracked, just once. "You left because you didn't believe you were loved." The words didn't land. They unraveled him. He looked down, at the soup, at his hands, at the spoon. He lifted it, slow, trembling. He dipped it into the broth, brought it to his lips. He didn't drink. He just held it there. The steam rose, fogged his glasses. He wiped them and whispered, "I thought, if I was good enough, if I worked harder, if I saved more lives, then maybe I'd finally be worthy." Clara didn't answer. She just reached out and took the spoon from his hand. She dipped it and brought it to his lips. Open. He didn't resist. He opened. She fed him. One slow spoonful. The broth was warm, tasted like memory, like forgiveness, like home. He swallowed and whispered, "It's good." She fed him again, again, again. Each spoonful a silent apology, each sip a quiet pardon. And then she didn't stop. She kept feeding him until the bowl was half empty. And then she set it down and said, "Now feed them." He looked at her. "Me," she nodded. "Luca's awake." He turned. Luca was watching, eyes open, not sleepy, not scared, just waiting for him. Elias swallowed. He picked up the spoon. He didn't know how. He didn't know if he could. He dipped it, slow, careful, brought it to Luca's lips. Open. The boy didn't hesitate. He opened. Elias fed him. One spoon, then another. Luca didn't speak. He just watched Elias, like he was memorizing the way his father moved, the way his hands trembled, the way his eyes filled. And then Mira stirred. She didn't open her eyes. but she reached out and placed her small hand on Elias's wrist. "Feed me too." He looked at her. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "I'm hungry." He fed her, one spoon, then another. Each time his hands shook less. Each time his breath steadied. And then Clara reached out and took the spoon. She dipped it and brought it to her own lips. She ate, slow, deliberate, as if she were tasting something she'd forgotten. And then she looked at Elias and said, "Now eat." He stared at her. "I'm not hungry." She didn't argue. She didn't push. She just lifted the bowl and held it to his lips. "Drink." He looked at her, then at the children, then back at her, and whispered. Why she didn't answer with words. She kissed his forehead, just once, soft, and whispered, "Because you're not a man who fixes things anymore." She paused. Her voice broke. "You're a man who lets himself be fixed." He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just opened his mouth and let her feed him. One last spoonful. The broth was cold now, but it still tasted like home. He swallowed and whispered, "I don't know how to be this." Clara didn't look away. She just said, "You don't have to know." She took the bowl, set it down, and then she reached out and took both of his hands, held them tight, and whispered, "You just have to stay." He looked at her, then at Luca, then at Mira, and then he looked down at his hands, at the scars, at the calluses, at the fingerprints that had held scalpels, that had signed papers, that had walked away, and now they held soup, they held children, they held love. He whispered, "I'm scared I'll mess up." Clara smiled, just a little. "I know. I'm scared I'll forget how to be good." She nodded. "I know. I'm scared you'll still hate me." She leaned in and kissed his cheek and whispered, "I don't hate you." She pulled back, looked him in the eye, and said, "I love you." He didn't breathe. He didn't move. He just stared, as if she just handed him the sun. And then Luca whispered, "Me too." Mira added, "Me too." And Elias, he didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just leaned forward and pressed his forehead to Clara's, just for a second, just long enough for her to feel his tears. And then he whispered, "I love you." 3 words, not shouted, not begged, not earned, just given, like a gift, like a promise, like a heartbeat. And then he pulled back, looked at Luca, and whispered, Can I hold you?" Luca didn't answer. He just opened his arms, and Elias pulled him in, tight, so tight it hurt. And then Mira crawled into his lap, and Clara leaned against his shoulder. And for the first time, they weren't a family that had broken. They were a family that had chosen to be whole, not because they were fixed, but because they were together. And the silence, it didn't feel empty anymore, felt sacred, felt like grace. And when the night deepened and the hospital lights dimmed, Elias didn't sleep. He just held them and whispered, "I'm here," again and again and again, until the world outside didn't matter, until the past didn't haunt, until the future didn't terrify, until all that was left was this warmth, this breath, this love, and the quiet, and the truth that he didn't have to be perfect. He just had to be here, and he wasn't going anywhere, not for fear, not for guilt, not for pride, not for anything, because love had found him, and it had waited, and now it had him, forever, and he was finally ready to be loved, not because he deserved it, but because they chose to give it, and that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. And as the moon rose, painting the room silver, he whispered, "I'm here." And for the first time, he meant it, not as a promise, but as a prayer. And the world, Myra's head resting on his chest, Clara's breath, warm, slow, steady, against his neck. And when he woke, it wasn't the beeping of machines. It wasn't the rustle of nurses. It was laughter, high, bright, unfiltered, like sunlight breaking through winter. He opened his eyes. The room was bright, morning, golden. The curtains were drawn back. The crocus outside had bloomed fully, and there on the floor, Luca and Mira were playing with the bear. They'd taken its button eye and tied a ribbon around its neck. They'd made it a crown, and now they were having a tea party on the hospital floor, with plastic cups, with invisible tea, with imaginary cookies. Luca sat cross-legged, holding the bear like a king. "Your Majesty," he said solemnly, "the royal tea is served. It is very hot." Mira giggled. She poured nothing into a cup, then lifted it. "To Papa," she announced. Luca nodded. "To Papa." Elias didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just watched, because this wasn't a game. This was a ritual, a sacred, quiet, healing thing. They didn't know he was awake. They didn't care. They were too busy being children, too busy being themselves. And then Mira looked up. Her eyes found his. She didn't scream, didn't jump, didn't run. She just smiled and whispered, "Papa's awake." Luca turned. His eyes widened, not with fear, with wonder. "You're smiling," he said. Elias didn't realize it, but he was. He didn't know when it had happened, but his lips were curved, just slightly, like the curve of a sunrise. He didn't answer. He just nodded. Mira climbed onto the bed. She placed the bear in his lap. Then she pressed her small palm against his chest, right over his heart. "Your heart beats loud," she said. He smiled. "Is it?" She nodded. "It's like a drum." Luca crawled up beside him. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and touched Elias's cheek with his finger, gently, like he was checking if he was real. "You're not gone," he whispered. Elias swallowed. "No, good." Then Mira leaned forward and kissed his forehead, just once, soft, like a blessing. And then she whispered, "We made you a crown." She held up the bear. The ribbon was tied in a knot, the button eye now a jewel. She placed it on his head. It slipped, halfway down his forehead. Luca laughed. Mira laughed. And Elias, he didn't laugh. He didn't cry. He just let it stay. Let the ribbon dangle. Let the bear rest on his brow. And whispered, "It's beautiful." Mira nodded. "Because you're the king of our hearts." Elias looked at her, really looked, at the freckles on her nose, at the way her hair curled at the ends, at the way she didn't need a diagnosis to know what love was. He reached out and pulled her close, held her, one arm around her, one arm around Luca, and whispered, "I don't know how to be a king." Luca didn't answer. He just leaned his head against Elias's shoulder and said, "You don't have to know." Mira added, "You just have to be here." Elias closed his eyes and whispered, "I am." And then the door opened. Clara stood there. She held 2 paper bags, one with toast, one with fresh fruit. She didn't say anything. She just watched them, the 3 of them, huddled together, the bear on his head, the ribbon dragging, the silence full of laughter. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just walked in and placed the bags on the table. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and said, "I brought you breakfast." Luca looked up. "Can we eat with our hands?" Clara nodded. "Yes." Mira grinned. "Even the toast?" Clara smiled, just a little. "Even the toast." Elias didn't move. He didn't let go. He just whispered, "You didn't have to bring it." Clara looked at him, then at the children, then back at him. "I didn't bring it for you." She paused. Then, "I brought it because I wanted to watch you eat with them." He looked at her, confused. Why she reached out and took his hand, not to hold, but to guide. She placed his palm flat on Luca's back, then on Myra's shoulder, and whispered, "Because love isn't something you do for them." She squeezed his fingers. "It's something you do with them." He didn't answer. He just looked down, at his hands, at their skin, at the way their fingers curled into his, like roots, like anchors, like home. And then Mira reached for the toast. She broke off a piece, dipped it in her juice, and held it out to him. "Try it." He looked at her. "You're feeding me again." She nodded. "Yeah." Why? She didn't say because you're my dad. She didn't say because you need it. She just said, because I want to. He opened his mouth. She fed him. One bite, then another. Luca did the same. He broke a piece of banana, held it up. "Papai," he said, "this is the king's fruit." Elias took it. He chewed slowly. It was sweet, not just from sugar, from something deeper, from presence, from belonging. He looked at Clara. She was watching, not with hope, not with fear, with quiet awe, like she was seeing something she'd never dared to believe was possible. And then she whispered, "I used to think love was a thing you kept." She paused, looked at the children, looked at him. Then, "I was wrong." She reached out and took his other hand and said, "Love is a thing you give away." She pressed their joined hands against Luca's chest, then Myra's, then her own, and whispered, "Until there's nothing left but the echo." Elias closed his eyes and whispered, "I don't know how to give it." Clara didn't answer. She just kissed his temple and said, "You already are." He opened his eyes, looked at Luca and Mira, at the bear on his head, at the ribbon dragging, at the toast crumbs on his shirt, at the juice on Myra's chin. And he realized he didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to fix anything. He just needed to be messy, to be human, to be here, to eat with them, to laugh with them, to let them crown him, to let them love him, even when he didn't feel worthy, even when he didn't know how, even when he was still afraid. And then Mira leaned in and whispered, "Papai, can you sing to us?" He froze. I don't know any songs." Luca nodded. "You sing when you're alone." Elias blinked. "What, you sing in the shower?" Mira said. "I heard you last night." He stared at her. "I didn't know you were awake." She smiled. "I wasn't, but I heard you." Clara looked at him. Her voice was soft. "You used to sing to me before we got married." He remembered. A lullaby, in Portuguese, his mother's. He hadn't sung it in 20 years. He didn't know why he remembered it, but now he did, and he didn't want to hide it. He didn't want to pretend. He just wanted to try, so he cleared his throat and whispered, "Okay." He took a breath and began, soft, slow, off-key, but true. "Dorm, meu bem, que a lua te abraca, e o vento canta, que o amor nunca vai te deixar." His voice cracked. His hands shook, but he kept going. Luca closed his eyes. Mira snuggled closer. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. And as the song ended, there was no applause, no tears, no words, just silence. And then Luca whispered, "Again." Elias smiled and sang it again and again. Each time his voice grew steadier. Each time his hands stopped trembling. Each time the room filled with something deeper than sound, with belonging, with safety, with love. And when he finished the third time, Mira whispered, "That's the best song ever." Luca nodded. "Yeah." Clara kissed his cheek and whispered, "Thank you." He looked at them, at his children, at the woman who never gave up, and he whispered, "I'm not a good singer." Mira shook her head. "You're the only one who sings to us." Luca added, "And that's enough." Elias closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm here." And this time he didn't say it to them. He said it to himself, because he finally understood. Love doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence. And he was finally present, not as a surgeon, not as a man who fixed things, but as a father who sang off-key, who wore crowns made of ribbon, who ate toast with his hands, who let his children love him even when he didn't feel worthy. And as the morning light spilled across the bed, he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just held them and sang again and again and again until the silence wasn't empty, until it was full, full of song, full of crumbs, full of joy, full of love. And he was finally home. not because he had earned it, but because they had chosen to give it. And he was finally ready to receive it, with open hands, with open heart, with open voice. And he would sing every day, for as long as they let him. Because now, but silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means the storm is coming. That morning, the nurse came in with a clipboard. "Dr. Vargas," she said gently. The clinic called. "They want to speak with you." Elias didn't move. He was feeding Mira a slice of apple, one tiny bite at a time. He didn't look up. About what? The nurse hesitated. The error, the mislabeled test. They're preparing a statement, and they want to offer compensation. Luca looked up. His eyes were clear, too clear. "Compensation?" he asked. Clara, who had been reading a book in the corner, lowered it slowly. She didn't speak. She just watched Elias. Elias set the apple down, wiped Myra's mouth with his thumb. Then he stood, slow, deliberate, walked to the door, opened it, and said to the nurse, "I don't want their money." She blinked. "Sir, they're offering a substantial amount. It could help with their care, therapy specialists, a new home." "I don't want their money," he repeated. His voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It was quiet, and that made it heavier. The nurse looked at Clara. Clara didn't move. She just whispered, "Let him." Elias turned back to the room. He didn't close the door. He just stood there, in the threshold, between the world that had betrayed him and the one that had saved him. And then he spoke, not to the nurse, not to the clinic, to the silence. "To them," he said, "I don't want your money." He paused, looked at Luca, looked at Mira, looked at Clara. "I want my children." Silence. The hallway outside was quiet. A gurney rolled past. No one spoke. The nurse swallowed. "Dr. Vargas, they're offering a public apology. A press release. They say they'll take full responsibility." Elias turned. His eyes were dry, but his voice cracked, just once. "I don't want an apology." He stepped back into the room, closed the door, walked to the window, looked out at the crocus. It had grown taller. Its petals had opened fully, yellow, bold, unafraid. He whispered, "I don't want them to say they're sorry for the paper." He turned, looked at them, at the boy who had held his hand through surgery, at the girl who had kissed his forehead and called him king, at the woman who had waited 3 years for him to come home. "I want them to say they're sorry for making me believe I wasn't enough." The words didn't echo. They landed, like stones in still water. Clara stood, walked to him, didn't touch him, just stood beside him, and whispered, "They can't say that." He looked at her. "I know." She turned to the children. "Do you want them to apologize?" Luca didn't answer right away. He looked at the bear, then at Elias, then at the window, and said, "They didn't make him leave." Clara frowned. What? Luca's voice was soft. "But they didn't stop him." Mira nodded. "They didn't tell him the truth." Elias closed his eyes. He felt it. The truth. Not the lie on the paper. The real one. The one that had hollowed him out. That he wasn't loved. That he wasn't worthy. That he was broken. And the clinic hadn't caused that. The clinic had just handed him the knife. He had chosen to use it. He turned to Clara. "I didn't leave because of the diagnosis." He swallowed. "I left because I believed it." Clara didn't say anything. She just reached out and took his hand and held it tight and whispered, "You're not broken." He looked at her. "I thought I was." "You thought you were unlovable." He didn't answer, because she was right. He had spent his life earning love, by being the best, by being strong, by never needing, and when he couldn't give them a child, he thought he'd lost his right to be loved. Luca climbed off the bed, walked to Elias, stood in front of him, looked up, and said, "You're not broken, Papai." Mira joined him. She placed her small hand on his chest, right over his heart. "You're just tired." Elias's breath caught. He looked down, at them, at the two tiny people who had seen through him without knowing how, and he whispered, How do you know? Luca didn't answer with words. He reached up and pressed his forehead to Elias's, just like he had the night of the surgery, and whispered, "Because your heart still beats," Mira added. "And because you stayed." Elias's eyes burned. He didn't cry. He just held them, both of them, one arm around each, and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Clara stepped forward. She didn't hug him. She didn't kiss him. She just stood beside him and said, "They're not asking you to forgive them." She paused. Her voice was quiet, but it cut deeper than any scalpel. "They're asking you to forgive yourself." Elias didn't move. He didn't speak. He just looked at his children, at the way Luca's fingers curled into his shirt, at the way Myra's head rested against his shoulder, at the way the bear's ribbon had slipped and now dangled just below his chin, like a reminder that he was crowned, not for being perfect, but for being present. He looked at Clara and whispered, "What if I can't?" She didn't answer. She just took the bear and placed it in his hands. Then she kissed his cheek and whispered, "You don't have to." She stepped back and walked to the door, opened it, and said, "The clinic is waiting." She didn't say you should go. She didn't say you must. She just said, "They're waiting." And then she left. The door closed, quiet, final. Elias looked at the bear, at the ribbon, at the button eye. He held it to his chest and whispered, "I don't know how to forgive myself." Luca looked up. "Do you forgive me?" Elias blinked. "What? For being scared? For crying? For needing you?" Elias swallowed. "Yes." "Then forgive yourself the same way," Mira added. "You forgave us for being messy." Luca nodded. "For being loud." Mira, "For being little." Luca, "For being ours." Mira, "So forgive yourself for being theirs." Elias closed his eyes. He felt it, the weight, the shame, the guilt, the years. And then he let go, not with words, not with tears, but with a breath, a slow, deep, shaking breath. And he whispered, "I forgive me." The words were quiet, but they cracked the ice. Inside him, around him, for the first time, he didn't feel like a man who had failed. He felt like a man who had survived. And he was still here, still holding, still loving, still choosing. He looked at the bear and whispered, "I forgive me," again and again, until the silence didn't feel like punishment, but like peace. And then he stood, walked to the door, opened it. Clara was waiting, just outside. She hadn't left. She'd been listening. She didn't say anything. She just held out her hand and whispered, "Are you ready?" He looked at her, at the children behind him, at the hallway, at the world that had tried to break him. And he whispered, "No." She blinked. "No." He smiled, just a little. "I'm not ready to forgive them." He stepped forward, took her hand, and said, "I'm ready to live." And then he turned, looked at Luca, looked at Mira, and whispered, "Come on." They didn't ask where they were going. They just followed. He didn't go to the clinic, didn't go to the press, didn't go to the lawyers. He walked to the garden, to the crocus, to the place where the first flower had pushed through the frost. He knelt and pulled a small stone from his pocket. It was smooth, from the river near his childhood home. He had carried it for years, a reminder of his father, of silence, of distance. He placed it in the dirt, beside the crocus, and whispered, "I'm not burying you." He looked up at the children, Clara, and said, "I'm planting something new." He took Luca's hand and placed it on the stone, then Myra's, and then Clara's, and whispered, "Love doesn't grow from guilt." He squeezed their fingers. "It grows from presence." He stood and looked at the flower, at the stone, at the sky, and whispered, "I'm not sorry I left." The children looked at him, confused. Clara held her breath. Elias didn't flinch. He said, "I'm sorry I stayed away." He looked at them, at his children, at the woman who had loved him through his silence, and said, I'm not sorry I didn't know you. He paused. Then, I'm sorry I forgot that love doesn't need a diagnosis. He knelt again and placed his hand over the stone and whispered, I'm sorry I thought I had to be perfect to be loved. He looked up and smiled. A real one, not perfect, not polished, just his. I'm not sorry I'm here. The wind stirred, the crocus swayed, and somewhere a bird sang. Luca reached for his hand. Papai, yes, baby. Will you sing again? Elias smiled.